Hi, my name is John Swanson, and I am the Global Category Manager for the road product here at Giant. What I want to do today is talk to you about the new Defy product. But before we get into that, I want to give you an overview about how we approach new projects when we work on them here at Giant in the road category. The first thing that we always look at is being authentic. What authentic means is that we are not going to produce a product unless it has a tangible benefit for the end user. We do not believe in gimmicks. And those gimmicks could include anything like a pivoting top tube or rubber bumper stuck in a frame someplace. We don't do any of that because it doesn't actually provide a tangible benefit to the end user. Everything that we do is pure engineering driven, performance oriented. If it does not provide a benefit to the end user, we will not do it regardless of marketing hype. So for model year 15, what's new with the Defy? Essentially everything but the geometry. We've retained the geometry from previous years because it's an award-winning geometry that's proven itself to be very authentic for the endurance rider. Outside of that geometry, we've built an entirely new program with the Advanced SL, the Advanced Pro, and the Advanced series, even the ALUX series. When we started looking at the new Defy, there were a few things that we definitely needed to focus on. Number one, which is crucial, which is control. How does the bike handle when you're going through a corner or you're sprinting, you're climbing, you're doing whatever you're normally doing on a bike? Weight is also a consideration. Stiffness, obvious. Compliance. Compliance is the big piece with endurance bikes. That's what everybody talks about. That's what's very important for these bikes. How do we improve compliance, improve stiffness, reduce weight, and maintain control? For the model year 15 Defys, one of the first things we looked at was about control. We've already got a kick-ass endurance geometry that's won awards all around the world. Don't mess with it if it's not broken. The other thing we wanted to include into this is the new range of disc brakes that are coming into the cycling world. You guys all understand disc brakes, you know what they can bring to a bike. Combining that geometry along with the new disc brakes, you will get that pinpoint control. One of the points we were looking at was weight. Weight's obviously very, very important in the cycling world. And what we were actually able to produce with the new Defy is the lightest frame that Giant has ever produced. How did we do that? One way that we did that was a smart use of materials. Anytime you punch a hole in carbon fiber, you have to add a significant amount of material to reinforce that hole. So what we did is we actually reduced the number of holes we put in the frame by combining the derailleur cables, the brake cables, whatever it is, into a concentrated area, reducing the number of holes we have to put into a frame. What's astounding is that we were actually able to cut 60 grams out of the new Defy disc brake frame sets, while our competitors are adding 60, 80, or even 100 grams to their disc brake frame sets. Part of the reason we were able to do this is that we went in and we committed to disc brakes from the very beginning. What that means is that we have no accommodations for rim brakes on any of the carbon fiber Defys. By eliminating any of those concessions to the rim brakes, we're able to cut all of that weight and focus our weight specifically on a disc brake committed frame set. So when we start talking about weight, what we do is we actually go out and we purchase our relevant competitors' frame sets from shops in the area. And what we consider to be a frame set is anything proprietary to the bike. What that means is you obviously have the frame, the fork, the headset, the expander, the seat post or the ISP clamp, the seat clamp itself, and the hangers. We combine all of those things together, we weigh them, and that's where we get the weights from in the following chart. So looking at this chart, you can see how everything's broken down, from the frame to the fork to the headset and all the miscellaneous parts that go into it. What's really important though is look at the bottom line. When you're looking at that bottom line, you'll notice that the new Defy Advanced SL is anywhere from 200 to 300 grams lighter than our relevant competitors. Those are astounding numbers. 300 grams is a ridiculous difference in frame weight. But what's really important here to note is that weight doesn't really matter. It's great to talk about, it's nice to say that you have a lighter bike than your buddy, but what really matters is the stiffness of the bike. How efficient is the actual bike when you're riding it? One of the most crucial aspects that we look at on any given project is about the stiffness. When we talk about stiffness, you have two things we're talking about here. One is frame stiffness. What frame stiffness is basically torsional stiffness. When you're flying into a corner and you're wrenching on the handlebars and you get your weight on your outside foot and the weight on the inside handlebar, you want to make sure that your front wheel and your rear wheel are following the same line. If they're not, you have massive problems. Another piece of the puzzle here is pedaling stiffness. When you put all that effort into your pedals, you want to make sure that all of that turns into forward motion. If it doesn't, again, you've got big problems. The frame stiffness test is a universally applicable and industry standard test. What we do is we fix the rear end into a steel fixture. We use the fork that comes from the manufacturer, we apply force to the side of that fork, and we measure the amount of force it takes to get the frame to move a degree. The pedaling stiffness test is also an industry standard test. The frame is fixed at the rear and the front, it's held at a slight angle, and there's a steel fixture which simulates the crank arm. We apply force to the crank arm and we measure the deflection at the bottom bracket in Newton meters per degree moved. So what we're looking at here is the stiffness data chart. So what you can see is all of our relevant competitors lined up just like they were in the weight chart you just saw, and you can see two different columns over there. One column is for frame stiffness, one column is for pedaling stiffness. The higher the numbers, the better. When you're looking at frame stiffness, this is what contributes to the overall ride quality of the bike. Whether you're sprinting, cornering, climbing, whatever it is you're doing that puts load or stress into the bike, frame stiffness is your friend. The pedaling stiffness is about forward efficiency. One thing to note about the pedaling stiffness is that once you get past a certain number, which is going to be in the low to mid 60s, it is irrelevant. The reason why it's irrelevant is because people are simply not strong enough to flex a frame past that point. Going back into frame stiffness, we are always striving to make a stiffer frame in a torsional sense. It only improves the ride quality and overall handling of the bike. Pedaling stiffness is kind of along for the ride at this point, because at this point we've got it figured out to the point where the stiffer we make it in a torsional sense, bottom bracket comes up accordingly. If you start looking at some of our competitors in here, they've got some work to do. So compliance is obviously a big piece of the puzzle here. And when you're talking about an endurance road bike, compliance is the one thing that everybody's talking about. With the new Defy, we had a couple of different things that we integrated into the new platform to improve the compliance of the bike. Number one is the defused seat post and ISP shaping. We pulled this shape over from the TCX, where we've proven it for the last year to be the most compliant shape out of any seat post shape on the market, including 27.2. The other piece of the puzzle here is about compliance tune technology. What that term means is that it encompasses all of the small details we put into the frame to increase the compliance. Those details include the super thin seat stays. Where the seat stays mount to the back of the seat tube, they're much lower than they are on a TCR or a Propel. To make those a little bit lower, combined with the thinness of those tubes, gives you a greater overall compliance. The top tube shaping. If you basically look at the top tube and compare it to the Defuse, it looks the same. There's a flat top section and a rounded bottom section. All of these pieces together increase the compliance of the new Defy series. So now we're going to get into the compliance testing aspect. But before we get into that, I want to make sure that we have a couple things crystal clear. There is no current industry standard test for compliance. It does not exist. There are far too many variables and far too many ideas from all the different manufacturers to agree on a set standard. It doesn't exist. We did the compliance testing simply because we were curious to see how we stacked up against our relevant competitors, given that we brought forth a frame that's so incredibly stiff in torsional and bottom bracket stiffness and has a very good ride feel. How did that stack up against our competitors who use gimmicks to get to the same place? Within the compliance testing, there are two specific tests. There's a front test and a rear test, and then we average those numbers together, and we're going to show that to you in just a second. One half of the testing we did focuses on the front end of the bike. We basically measured the amount of vibration that gets transmitted through the fork, the head tube, into the steer tube, the stem, into the bars, and what actually happens at the hands of the rider. The other half of the test, we measured the rear of the bike. Basically, how much vibration travels through the bottom bracket area into the seat tube, past the seat stays, the top tube, up the ISP or seat post, and then into the rider. So with the details of the test that we did, we basically put the frame in and it's fixed at both the front and the rear axle. We added weight to the head tube, the top of the seat post, as well as down at the bottom bracket. The weight that we added was 10 kilos at the head tube, 30 kilos at the top of the seat post, 50 kilos down at the bottom bracket. These weights will simulate an average weight distribution of an average rider for that size frame. So once we have the bike set in the fixture with the weight applied and the axles locked in, we applied varying frequencies from below. What we did then is we measured where that frequency comes through and what's the vibration output at the top of the seat post where you would be seated, as well as on the front where effectively your hands would be if you're in a riding position. So like I said before, there is no industry standard test for compliance. So we did this purely out of curiosity because we wanted to see where we stacked up against our relevant competitors who tend to rely on gimmicks to get where they are. So this is the gathered data for the compliance testing that we just talked about. What you'll notice on here is that we were actually able to get to the same place as everybody else basically, but again, we don't use any gimmicks to get to this point. One of the things I found very interesting, as well as my engineers, is that the lower the number, the better, which means that the least amount of vibration gets transmitted from the axle to the rider. But the bike that actually did the best on here, go back and take a look at the stiffness charts. What you're seeing on this compliance chart isn't a true indicator of its overall compliance. What you're seeing here is the complete inadequacy of the bike as a performance machine. So at the end of the day, the 2015 Defy Advanced SL is significantly lighter than its predecessor and much, much lighter than all of its relevant competitors. At the same time, it's much stiffer in an efficiency standpoint than it's ever been before. And what's crazy to think is that it's almost the same stiffness as a Propel Advanced SL, which just won 4 stages of the Tour de France. On top of all that, we've significantly increased the compliance of the bike, not only by using the defuse post, but smart arrangement of materials through chainstay, seat stay, top tube shaping. All of these pieces coming together make the Defy Advanced SL a bike that is simply untouchable for model year 15.